And now the judges will introduce themselves.
Hi, good morning. Congratulations, Kansas, on making it to the national finals and this unusual school year. And we're really looking forward to talking with you this morning. My name is Ben Glickman. I'm actually an alumnus of this program. I was on a national championship team way back in 1995. In my day job today, I work for the California Attorney General's office, and I'm also a member of the Center for Civic Education's Board of Directors.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm not sure quite which. Welcome to the We the People National Competition. My name is Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver.
You're muted.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ali Khan. I am a lawyer in Chicago, and I also, too, like Ben, am an alumnus of the program.
All right, if you would please introduce yourselves and your teacher.
My name is Jack Bensing.
Hello, my name is Caleb Johnson.
Hi, my name is Caroline Flanagan.
My name is Shora Ramanujan, and we are all seniors in Mr. Ken Thomas's We the People class at Blue Valley Northwest High School in Overland Park, Kansas.
Great, thank you. Congratulations again. And I assume Hannah talked about how she'll pop up with the time warnings and things of that. Okay, perfect. Well, if you're ready, then we will go ahead and get going. Your question today is number 1. I do not think the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of the several states. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review a counter-majoritarian practice? Please support your position. What limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review?
The 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution holds that state governments only have power when the national government does not address certain issues. When the states make unconstitutional laws and the federal government fails to address them, the Supreme Court has the opportunity to intervene. Consequently, when judicial review on the federal level strikes down allegedly unconstitutional state laws, a baseline is created on what laws are acceptable. With a baseline, the federal government is given more control in the process of federalism. Oliver Wendell Holmes stated that, as a Supreme Court justice, he would be concerned if the Supreme Court lost its ability to control state laws. Considering the history of the Supreme Court, there have been many important cases where state laws were struck down by the Supreme Court.
The first state law the Supreme Court struck down was Fletcher v. Peck in 1810, and the High Court has continued to strike down state laws ever since that time. In 1816, the court case McCauley v. Maryland, the Supreme Court ruled that the state of Maryland could not tax the Second Bank of the United States. More recently, the Supreme Court decision in Baker v. Carr struck down a state law that discriminated against certain voters and ruled that one person is equal to one vote. When the state makes an unconstitutional law, it is part of the Supreme Court's job to strike it down. If the Supreme Court were to lose this important role, states would be given too much power in making laws under federalism, and unconstitutional laws would be given little examination.
The Supreme Court often does not take into account public opinion for any laws that are being litigated. Because a blind eye is frequently turned to public opinion, the Supreme Court can sometimes be defined as a counter-majoritarian practice. The purpose of the Supreme Court is to interpret the law, not public opinion. The High Court has declined to intervene on partisan and racial gerrymandering in the past decade in cases such as Gill v. Whitford, even though, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, 63% of the American people disapprove of gerrymandering. If the court perceives the right decision as going against the majority of the American people, the Supreme Court will often proceed regardless. This characteristic of the Supreme Court underlines the importance of the courts that have judicial independence. The judiciary should not infringe on the other two branches of government, who operate largely based on public opinion. The Supreme Court operating based on public opinion would infringe on the legislative and executive branch's means of operation, which exemplifies an obvious limit to judicial review.
Of course, there are other limitations that come with judicial review. Oftentimes, the Supreme Court is unable to set a ceiling for laws. For example, when the Supreme Court ruled that schools cannot be segregated in Brown v. Topeka Board of Education, states could not go below that ruling and continue to segregate schools. Instead, states had to desegregate schools and assess whether they should make further policy. The federal courts set a baseline for the states, not a ceiling. In reality, judicial review also has limits on when it can be used. Because of the complicated nature of our lower courts, some court cases fail to come before the Supreme Court, and they therefore fail to obtain thorough judicial review. Because of the sustainability of these current realities over hundreds of years, it is prudent to continue these limits to judicial review. There are, however, further limits that should be placed on judicial review. For one, individuals that have previously held public office should be barred from being able to be nominated to the Supreme Court for the High Court to maintain its judicial independence. In the early 20th century, former President William Howard Taft was appointed Chief Justice to the Supreme Court. During his tenure, he advocated and pushed for legislation such as the Judiciary Act of 1925, whose advocacy should have been done with an absence of input from the judicial branch. The judiciary should never compromise its judicial independence on proposed bills that come up for debate in Congress. Therefore, Taft's tenure on the Supreme Court shows that if a politician is made part of the High Court, it is more tempting for that politician to legislate from the bench. The Supreme Court should improve its transparency by allowing the public to also look and listen into the deliberation of the nation's most powerful court. The High Court should no longer have the ability to privatize the deliberation of court cases that are being heard to increase transparency of judicial review. Although the current process of judicial review has been sustainable, there are still further modifications that should be made to make the process more efficient. Thank you. We are now ready for your questions.
Great, thanks. I wanted to pick up on the counter-majoritarian portion of the question. I think in your presentation, you said that the Supreme Court acts without regard to public opinion. Are there counter examples of that where you think the Supreme Court went with public opinion or declined to act in a case because it would have been counter to public opinion?
So when the court is under great stress, such as during wartime or certain eras like that, the Supreme Court is more inclined to listen to public opinion more. So in World War I, for example, in Shank versus United States, or cases in World War II, public opinion is more listened to by the court because the United States is under great stress in those times.
Additionally, there are more recent examples, such as in Trump v. Vance, and the court ruled on a 7-2 decision that Trump can't block the disclosure of his financial records to prosecutors in New York. That would be an example of how the courts ended up ruling in a similar way as public opinion had supposed.
I'd like to pick up on your comments about, again, about public opinion and gerrymandering. There have been some times when the Supreme Court has decided not to address an issue based on what's called the political question doctrine. Do you think that that should be a basis for the Supreme Court not to hear certain cases, or do you think the Supreme Court should decide any case, even if it's a political issue?
I think that federal courts should refuse to hear a case if there is a political question, because if an issue is so politically charged that federal courts would, if they were to rule on such an issue, it would deteriorate their standing as an apolitical branch of the government. So in order to maintain judicial independence and stay as a rather neutral branch of government, I do not believe that they should rule on political questions.
I would actually disagree with my colleague Shore, and I would say that that the Supreme Court is actually designed to it's designed to kind of solve really like complicated issues and issues that have a lot of heated debate. And so if that means if it's a political issue, it doesn't matter. As long as the issue has some sort of conflict, it is the Supreme Court's job to solve that conflict, whether it's political or not.
I'd also like to add to Jack's point in that if a issue is so controversial or political, it is almost necessary for the Supreme Court to actually step in and provide a third view on using only principles found in the Constitution to support their ideas.
One thing I'd like to kind of go back to from your presentation, as you mentioned the problem with folks who were previously publicly elected officials serving as federal judges. Can you maybe go more in depth and tell me what is your true concern with that? What do you really worry about happening?
Well, when Chief Justice Taft was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court predominantly in the 1920s, he actually advocated for the Judiciary Act of 1925, which actually reformed the court. And we would contend, or at least I would contend, that him advocating something that is solely up to the legislative branch, it's a piece of legislation from the legislative branch, is not called for and is not right. So to put that in a modern context, there would be a lot of protest and controversy if, say, Chief Justice Roberts were to go to Congress and advocate for something like Taft did. So that's why I would advocate that politicians or former presidents should not have any role in the Supreme Court.
But I don't understand, because you mentioned Taft and then you mentioned an example with Chief Justice Roberts. There would be a problem if he went to advocate for something, but Chief Justice Roberts, to my knowledge, is not a previously elected official. So this seems to be a Taft problem, not a previously elected official problem.
I think to further add to what Jack was saying is that former presidents or former highly charged politicians should not be involved in the future as Supreme Court justices, in the same reason why Supreme Court justices should not overreach their power and step into issues such as Congress. I think an issue that could easily resolve this is being able to put term limits on the ability for a Supreme Court justice to stay in power for a certain amount of time. However, I would agree with Jack in saying that former presidents and people who have had politically charged opinions and have been strongly influenced by political opinions should not be able to legislate from the bench, as we had said in our paper, by serving as a Supreme Court justice.
I would like to agree with my colleagues Jack and Shore that if a Chief Justice were to serve in any other command, for example, if a representative or congressman were to become a justice, it would create too many problems and too much of a mix between the three legislative branches.
Thanks. I wanted to shift gears a little bit. Some people contend that the court's lack of an enforcement power, it doesn't have an army to enforce its decisions, that lack of an enforcement power is a significant check on the court. Do you agree with that, one? And then two, how do you think that impacts the court's decision making?
To answer the first part of your question, I would say it does affect the court's ability to enforce its decision, because the court, for example, cannot compel Congress or the president to obey one of its rulings, and it relies upon the other two branches to carry out its rulings. So for that first part, I would say that the ability for the court to not be able to enforce its ruling does constrain its power. If my colleagues would like to answer the second half of this question.
Yeah, would you mind repeating the second half of your question real quick?
Sure. Just how do you think the lack of an enforcement power influences the court's decision making?
All right. Well, besides obviously having the check on the judiciary branch, I believe that their ability to not enforce certain procedures or certain laws is the way that the three branches of government works, is that the executive branch actually has the power to enforce laws. So I think that by not allowing the judiciary branch to, I guess, enforce their procedures would be that it allows them to, I guess, not have the ultimate say in all procedures.
Well,
And I guess what I'm trying to get at, do you think that makes the court more likely to side with majority opinion, public opinion, or the views of Congress, because they know that they're going to need to rely on others for the enforcement or to adhere to the decision? Does that affect the actual decisions?
Honestly, I think that it can have some influence, but I don't think the overall decision would be affected, mainly because Supreme Court justices are more focused on trying to interpret the Constitution strictly and not trying to be swayed by public opinion or other opinions.
I think they're swayed.
Actually, we're out of time. Sorry, Jack.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for the students. And now the judges have some feedback for you.
Sure, I'll go first since I'm already unmuted. I don't have a ton of feedback on the presentation. I thought you answered the question. I appreciated the brief, concise history of when the court has overruled the states. I might have liked to hear about the incorporation doctrine and how that relates to this question. That seems kind of critical to the court's expanded role in regulating the states. And likewise, I think we could have heard a bit more on the counter-majoritarian aspect. With a question like this, I think it's most important to kind of define what that means to you so that way we understand where you're coming from before we really start delving into it. So anytime you get a question with kind of a complex legal term like that, I would always encourage you to define it. Number one, it tells the judges you know what it means, and then it also can kind of focus the conversation a bit. On the question and answers, I thought you guys did a nice job. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with everything, but that's okay. I think the court is very cognizant of public opinion. And I think a big part of that is because they don't have the enforcement power. Their legitimacy is contingent on people following their decisions. And if they just went crazy and started doing a bunch of things that the public disagreed with, that legitimacy might not be long for the world. And I also quibble with whether the justices are only concerned with interpreting the Constitution. But those are good disagreements that lots of people have. Yeah, I'll let my colleagues chime in from here, but overall, I thought you guys did a nice job.
I will echo what Ben said. I thought you did a nice job. I liked in your opening statement the examples you gave of the Supreme Court cases holding state statutes unconstitutional. And I'd like to reference to public opinion and the contrast between that and the Supreme Court's decision or lack of decision in Gill v. Whitford about gerrymandering. That was a good example. I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about the political question doctrine, because the Supreme Court used to consider that and decided not to hear certain issues. And now the Supreme Court hears virtually every issue that comes before it, no matter how political it is. But I was glad to see that you disagreed among yourselves as to whether the Supreme Court should or should not decide cases that are political in nature. Your proposal about not having the Supreme Court justices who have been politicians is an interesting issue, but you should know that in the past, and when Justice Brandeis and Justice Frankfurter were on the Supreme Court, they had frequent conversations and meetings with the then President of the United States. So the fact that they were not politicians beforehand didn't prevent them from getting involved in political issues. So that's always a question that we have. Two other quick things. The lack of, or the Supreme Court following public opinion during World War I with the Schenck case was a good example. You might have mentioned the Korematsu case during World War II, which I think would have supported that statement also. And finally, when you're talking about the lack of enforcement power, you might have talked about the civil rights cases and the limited ability the Supreme Court had to enforce Brown versus the Board of Education. So, but overall, I think you guys did a really nice job. So congratulations.
Again, great job, guys, and congratulations for being here. I know how tough it is to be on the other side of this. I think my colleagues have, I think covered most of it. So I don't have too much to add. I thought you guys did a really great job, especially handling some tough free response questions. Just to give you clarity as to, I would have liked to see more explanation as to what was truly the problem with the elected official being a judge, because what jumped out to me was, I believe Chief Justice Warren was immediately the governor of California before he was appointed the Chief Justice in the Warren Court is quite an important, court in our legal history here. So that really just jumped out at me as if there's a problem with that, I want to know like what is truly the problem with someone being elected, previously being in the, a judge. So, but again, it's a tough line of questioning. So you guys handled it gracefully. So great job on that.
All right. Well,